The moment my sister Cordelia pulled that trigger, she didn't just hit her target, she shattered every assumption about the quiet girl who used to cry over dead birds in our backyard. Before we dive in, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. I'm Maya Thorne, and 3 years ago, I watched my younger sister transform from a literature major who made lavender soap in her dorm room into the woman who saved 17 American soldiers with a single shot from an M24 sniper rifle. But before I tell you how she stopped General Rashid Kazemi cold at 750 meters, you need to understand who Cordelia really was. Picture this: a 22-year-old standing barely 5'2", with gentle hazel eyes that always seemed to be reading poetry even when she was looking right at you. Her hands perpetually smelled like the lavender soap she crafted every Sunday evening, the same hands that would tremble when she had to swat a fly. This was the girl who once spent 3 hours in the rain trying to save a baby sparrow that had fallen from its nest, who sobbed uncontrollably during war movies, who couldn't even watch when our dad cleaned the fish he caught on our family camping trips. Our father, Colonel Vincent Thorne, had been trying to toughen her up for years. "Delia, the world isn't all sonnets and flower pressing," he'd say during his rare visits home. But she'd just smile and quote Emily Dickinson back at him, something about hope being the thing with feathers. Dad would shake his head, but I always caught him smiling when he thought no one was looking. Our grandfather, retired Marine Sergeant Ezra Thorne, saw something different in her, though. Every Sunday after church, while I was playing video games or hanging out with friends, Grandpa Ezra would take Cordelia to what he called life skills training. I thought he was teaching her how to change a tire or balance a checkbook. I had no idea he was teaching her to calculate wind speed, adjust for elevation, and control her breathing while looking through a rifle scope. "Your sister's got steady hands and a mathematician's mind," Grandpa told me once when I asked why he spent so much time with her. "She just hasn't found her moment yet." That moment came on a scorching Tuesday morning in Afghanistan, when everyone questioned who had the audacity to hand a sniper rifle to a college girl who looked like she belonged in a poetry reading, not a combat zone. They stopped questioning when she made a shot that military snipers called impossible, threading a bullet through a 6-inch gap to eliminate the most dangerous arms dealer in the region, while 2 children stood directly in front of him. But here's what nobody knew until that moment. Cordelia had been preparing for this shot her entire life. Not just the technical training with Grandpa Ezra, not just the ballistics theory she'd studied obsessively, but every moment she'd spent learning that true strength isn't about being fearless. It's about acting with precision and purpose when everything depends on getting it exactly right. The day she took that shot, my sister didn't just save those 17 soldiers. She proved that courage doesn't come in the package you expect. That sometimes the person who cries over injured birds is exactly the person you want holding the rifle when lives hang in the balance. This is the story of how a literature major with lavender-scented hands became the sniper who made an impossible shot and stopped a general cold. This is the story of my sister Cordelia, and the day she discovered that being gentle and being dangerous aren't opposites. They're 2 sides of the same extraordinary strength. Cordelia wasn't supposed to be in Afghanistan. Hell, none of us expected our quiet family to be torn between 2 war zones, one overseas and one in a sterile hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and dying dreams. It started with a phone call at 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday in March. I answered because Cordelia was dead asleep after pulling an all-nighter writing her thesis on war poetry, the irony of which wouldn't hit us until weeks later. Mom's voice was steady, but I could hear the tremor underneath. "Girls, I need you both to come home. We need to talk. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer." The words hit our family like shrapnel, leaving us all wounded and scrambling to figure out how to keep breathing. Dad had been stationed at Forward Operating Base Sentinel in Afghanistan for 8 months. Leading a transition team that was supposed to hand over operations to Afghan forces. His replacement wasn't scheduled to arrive for another 6 weeks. "I have to go back," Dad said during one of our marathon family meetings around Mom's hospital bed. "These soldiers are depending on me to see this through." "Vincent, your wife is dying," our mother said quietly, but with that steel in her voice that meant she wasn't negotiating. "Your place is here." That's when Cordelia, who had been silently grading freshman composition papers in the corner chair, looked up with that determined expression I'd seen 1,000 times growing up. It was the same look she got when she decided to rescue every stray animal in our neighborhood. The same look when she announced she was switching her major to literature despite Dad's protests. "I'll go," she said simply. The room went dead silent. Dad actually laughed, which was probably the worst possible response. "Delia, sweetheart, this isn't summer camp. This is an active military base in a combat zone." "I know what it is, Dad. I also know you've been sending me copies of your field reports and operational manuals for the past year. I know the organizational structure, the supply chain management, and the transition protocols better than most of your junior officers." Mom reached for Cordelia's hand. "Honey, you faint when you watch medical shows on TV. That's different. This is necessary." Cordelia's voice was calm, but I could see her hands shaking slightly as she gathered her papers. "Dad, you trained me to think strategically. Mom needs you here for whatever time she has left. The base needs someone from our family to maintain continuity until your replacement arrives. I can handle the administrative duties." What none of us knew was that every Sunday afternoon with Grandpa Ezra hadn't just been about changing tires and balancing checkbooks. While we thought she was learning basic life skills, she was actually learning to read topographical maps, calculate ballistic trajectories, and control her breathing under pressure. Grandpa Ezra had been quietly preparing her for something like this since Mom's diagnosis, when we all realized how quickly everything you depend on can disappear. "Besides," Cordelia added with a small smile that didn't quite hide her terror, "someone needs to make sure you come home in one piece to take care of Mom when this is over." 2 weeks later, she was boarding a military transport plane with Dad's old duffel bag, her laptop full of poetry, and a secret that would soon change everything we thought we knew about courage. Cordelia landed at Forward Operating Base Sentinel carrying nothing but determination and a backpack full of Emily Dickinson poems. The base commander, Colonel Garrett Hayes, took one look at this 5'2" literature major and assigned her to the safest possible duty, filing supply reports in an air-conditioned office. "Miss Thorne, I promised your father I'd keep you safe," Hayes told her on day 1. "That means staying inside, staying quiet, and staying out of the way." For 3 days, that arrangement worked perfectly. Cordelia organized inventory reports, updated personnel files, and video called Mom every evening to report that yes, she was eating enough and no, she wasn't in any danger. But on the 4th morning, everything changed. Intelligence reports came flooding in about General Rashid Kazemi, the arms dealer who had been fueling insurgent attacks throughout the region for the past 2 years. American forces had been hunting him for months, and finally they had solid intel. He was meeting with tribal leaders at a compound just 2 miles from the base. "This isn't a negotiation," Staff Sergeant Rodriguez explained during the emergency briefing that Cordelia overheard from her desk. "Intelligence intercepts suggest he's planning to use this meeting as bait. He wants to lure our forces into an ambush." Colonel Hayes spread tactical maps across the briefing table. "We take him out before he can spring his trap. Clean shot, minimal collateral damage. Sergeant Morrison, you're our primary shooter." That's when Sergeant Morrison, the base's top sniper, doubled over in pain. Severe food poisoning had him vomiting every 10 minutes. The backup sniper's rifle had malfunctioned during routine maintenance the day before, and the replacement parts wouldn't arrive for another week. "Sir, we can't wait," Rodriguez insisted. "Kazemi moves locations every few hours. If we miss this window, we lose him for another 6 months. Hayes slammed his fist on the table. "I'm not sending soldiers into an ambush without sniper support, but I'm also not letting this bastard slip through our fingers again." The room filled with tense silence as officers tried to solve an impossible problem. That's when Cordelia's voice cut through the air from her corner desk. "Colonel Hayes, what's the distance to target?" Every head in the room turned toward her. Hayes actually looked confused. "Excuse me, Miss Thorne." "The compound. How far is the shot?" 750 meters, but I don't see why that's relevant to filing supply reports." Cordelia stood up, her hands steady despite the dozen pairs of eyes staring at her. "Because I can make that shot." The room erupted. Officers started talking over each other, questioning whether the stress had gotten to the college girl. Hayes held up his hand for silence, but his expression was somewhere between concern and disbelief. "Miss Thorne, with all due respect, this isn't target practice at your local shooting range. This is precision shooting under combat conditions with lives on the line." "I understand that, sir, but I've been trained, and I know the M24 system. Wind conditions are minimal, visibility is clear, and the target zone has predictable sight lines. Hayes stared at her for a long moment. Trained by whom? Trained by whom? Hayes repeated, his voice sharp with skepticism. Cordelia straightened her shoulders, and for the first time since arriving at the base, she looked less like a college student and more like a Thorne. Retired Marine Sergeant Ezra Thorne. My grandfather, every Sunday for the past year. The room shifted. Sergeant Rodriguez whistled low. Ezra Thorne? The Ezra Thorne who held the record for longest confirmed kill in Vietnam? That's him, Cordelia confirmed. He taught me to shoot because he said every member of our family should be able to protect what matters. I didn't think he meant this, but here we are. Hayes studied her carefully. Miss Thorne, if you miss this shot, soldiers die. If you're not mentally prepared for that responsibility, tell me now. Cordelia's voice didn't waver. Colonel, my mother is dying of cancer back home, and my father gave up his last weeks with her so this mission could succeed. 17 soldiers are going to walk into an ambush if we don't stop Kazemi. I'm not walking away from this responsibility. What happened next became base legend. Hayes made a decision that would either save lives or destroy his military career. You get 4 hours of prep time. If Master Sergeant Torres doesn't clear you as combat ready, this conversation never happened. The next 4 hours transformed Cordelia from administrative assistant to precision shooter. Torres, the base's most experienced marksman, worked with her at the makeshift range behind the motor pool. The M24 felt massive in her hands at first, nearly twice the weight of Grandpa Ezra's hunting rifle. Your grandfather taught you well, Torres admitted after watching her consistently hit targets at 600 meters. Your breathing control is textbook, and your natural steadiness is better than most recruits I've trained. But this wasn't about hitting paper targets. At Eero 200 hours, Cordelia lay prone on the roof of Building C. The M24's scope focused on the compound where Kazemi would appear in less than 5 hours. The night air was crisp and she could hear radio chatter from the teams positioning themselves around the target area. Her mind drifted to a conversation with Grandpa Ezra just before she left for Afghanistan. They'd been at his backyard range, and she'd just made 6 consecutive bullseyes at 500 yards. Delia, he had said, adjusting her scope. Your great-grandmother was a resistance fighter in occupied France. She never missed when it mattered. Your grandmother patched up Marines under fire in Vietnam and never lost a patient she could save. Fear is just another variable to calculate. As dawn approached, Cordelia checked her equipment one final time. Wind speed, minimal. Distance, 750 meters. Target acquisition, pending. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled, and her mind focused on a single truth that Grandpa Ezra had drilled into her. When everything depends on getting it right, you don't think about failure. You calculate the variables and trust your training. At 0630 hours, her radio crackled. Target approaching the compound. Stand by for visual confirmation. This was it. At 0647 hours, General Rashid Kazemi stepped out of the compound doors exactly as intelligence had predicted. But what they hadn't predicted was the nightmare scenario unfolding through Cordelia's scope. 2 children, a boy and a girl who couldn't have been older than 8, were positioned directly in front of Kazemi as he moved toward the meeting point. Human shields, the most ruthless tactical move possible. I have visual on target, Cordelia whispered into her radio, her voice steady despite her racing heart. But he's using children as cover. Do you have a clean shot? Torres's voice crackled through her earpiece. Cordelia studied the scene through her scope. Kazemi kept the children close, their small bodies blocking any clear line of fire to his torso. This wasn't random positioning. He knew American forces were watching and had planned this protection perfectly. Negative. No clean shot available. All units, abort mission, Hayes commanded. We cannot risk civilian casualties. But Cordelia didn't move from her position. Something Grandpa Ezra had taught her echoed in her mind. Study your environment, not just your target. The solution might not be where you're looking. She adjusted her scope, scanning the compound's architecture behind Kazemi. The building was old, constructed in traditional Afghan style with thick walls and narrow window openings. As Kazemi moved toward the meeting point, his path would take him past a specific section where architectural necessity had created a gap, a narrow window opening that aligned perfectly with his route. Wait, Cordelia breathed into her radio. I see something, she calculated quickly. If Kazemi maintained his current pace and direction, there would be a moment, maybe 2 seconds, when his movement would position him directly in line with that window opening. The gap would create approximately 6 inches of clear space between his upper torso and the children. Command, I have a potential shot opportunity. Window gap in the building behind target, 6-inch clearance. Negative, Miss Thorne. Margin of error is too high. Stand down. Cordelia watched Kazemi approaching the critical position. In 30 seconds, he would be at the meeting point, surrounded by tribal leaders and impossible to target without massive collateral damage. This was the only chance. She thought about Mom lying in that hospital bed, fighting for every breath. She thought about Dad missing those precious final weeks to ensure this mission succeeded. She thought about the 17 soldiers who would die in Kazemi's planned ambush if she didn't take this shot. "I'm taking the shot," she whispered. Time slowed. Cordelia controlled her breathing exactly as Grandpa Ezra had taught her. 1 breath in, half breath out, hold. Heart rate steady. Wind speed negligible. Distance, 750 meters. Target moving at consistent pace. Kazemi stepped into perfect alignment with the window gap. Cordelia squeezed the trigger. The bullet traveled 750 meters in 1.3 seconds, threading through that impossible 6-inch gap with surgical precision. General Rashid Kazemi dropped instantly, the children completely unharmed and unaware of how close death had passed over their heads. The compound erupted in chaos as bodyguards scattered, but the primary target was eliminated. For 17 seconds, absolute silence filled the radio channels. Then Torres's voice filled with disbelief. "Target down." "Repeat, target is down." "How the hell did you make that shot?" The base fell silent for exactly 17 seconds before erupting in cheers that could be heard across the entire compound. But Cordelia remained motionless on that rooftop, still looking through her scope at the chaos below, tears streaming down her face. Colonel Hayes climbed up to the roof and found her sitting beside the M24, carefully cleaning the rifle with the same methodical precision she used to organize supply reports. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. "Miss Thorne," Hayes said softly, settling down beside her. "That was a 1 in a million shot. Military snipers train for years to attempt something like that, and most would never even try it." Cordelia looked up at him, her hazel eyes still wet but somehow stronger than they'd been 3 days ago. "No, sir, that wasn't a 1 in a million shot. That was 3 generations of Thorne women refusing to let impossible circumstances dictate what we're capable of accomplishing. The intelligence gathered from Kazemi's compound changed everything. They discovered detailed plans for coordinated attacks on 4 American bases, supply route maps for weapons shipments that would have armed insurgents for months, and communication networks that led to 17 other high-value targets. The planned ambush that would have killed American soldiers was called off within hours. When Cordelia finally returned home 2 weeks later, she found Mom still fighting, still holding on with that stubborn Thorne determination. Dad was there, holding her hand through chemotherapy sessions and reading her favorite poetry during the long hospital nights. "I heard about Afghanistan," Mom whispered during one of their quiet moments together. "Your father told me what you did." "I just did what needed to be done," Cordelia replied, but Mom shook her head. "No, sweetheart. You did what most people would consider impossible. There's a difference." Mom lived for 3 more months. Long enough to see Cordelia graduate summa cum laude with her literature degree. Long enough to attend the ceremony where Cordelia received a commendation from the Department of Defense for her service. Long enough to watch her youngest daughter transform from the girl who cried over injured birds into a woman who understood that strength comes in forms you never expect. Today, Cordelia works as a trauma counselor for returning veterans, helping soldiers process experiences that most civilians can't understand. She still makes lavender soap every Sunday, still quotes Emily Dickinson when she's thinking deeply about life, but she also practices at the shooting range with Grandpa Ezra every weekend. Strength isn't about being fearless, she tells the veterans she counsels. It's about calculating your variables, trusting your training, and having the courage to act when everything depends on precision. Her office wall displays 2 items, her literature degree and a photo of that impossible shot trajectory, mathematically mapped by military analysts who still can't quite believe she threaded a bullet through a 6-inch gap to save 17 lives. Sometimes soldiers ask her how a literature major found the strength to make that shot. Her answer is always the same. I didn't find strength. I discovered that strength was always there, waiting for the right moment to prove that gentle hearts can have steady hands when it matters most. That's the lesson my sister Cordelia learned in Afghanistan, and it's one that changed how our entire family understands what courage really looks like.